Afternoon on a lovely day to have a hearing of the Ethics Committee. The chairman notes the president's quorum. I'm going to ask Senator Robertson if he would begin with the invocation.
Number 13. Yeah. For those of you who choose, if you'll bow your head with me, please. Dear Heavenly Father, we humbly approach you today, Lord God, and we ask for your blessings and wisdom, God. We ask that you remind us, Lord God, we enter into these phrases, Lord God, with open hearts and open minds. Remind us, Lord God, that it is our job to allow your light to reflect through us. We ask all these things in the precious name of your Son and our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.
I want to thank the good senator and congratulate him on becoming a new grandfather. Yesterday afternoon, a young lady, Cora, is that right? Cora? Very good. Well, I promise you, he's just lost his wallet, but he's certainly lost his heart. So we're here today. I have an agenda item. We'll have one bill on our agenda. It's House Bill 1464. This is a hearing only. No action will be taken. It's really a presentation for the authors to explain the bill to the committee and for the committee to ask any questions and get any clarification. We're delighted to have everyone here. You're welcome to be here. Today we will not take public testimony. That'll come next week. We'll make sure that we give you a good heads up on that. Tentatively Monday afternoon at the regular meeting time, 4 o'clock. Bring your jammies, and we'll be happy to accept your input. But right now I'd like to acknowledge and recognize the author, Representative Burchett, Chairman Burchett, and Representative Gunter, Chairman Stan Gunter, who is the chairman of the House Special Committee on Elections. So, Representative Burchett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to defer to the chairman of the committee from which the bill came, and I'm going to stand in support for the provisions throughout the bill. We've sort of been tag teaming this measure. It's a large measure. It's a good piece of legislation. And Chairman Gunter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, I have a brief summary. I know the hour's kind of late today, and I think this might answer a lot of questions, and then we'll take questions that we should be able to handle them together. Sections 1 and 3.
Just for the record, this is HB 1464. LC number is 471759S. Is that correct?
That is correct. That's the one I'm
Thank
operating
you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. All right. Sections 1 and 3 provide that any private person or non-governmental entity seeking to provide a grant or donation to the state or an election superintendent for any purpose related to election administration must file an application for approval with the State Election Board. The State Election Board will determine if the grant offers a partisan advantage. Approved grants must be made directly to the State Election Board, and the State Election Board will distribute the funds at their discretion. Section 2 allows the State Election Board to appoint members of the county boards of elections or county boards of elections and registration to a performance review board. Now, these are not the same. It's not the county that's under review. It'll be other county board members that we're talking about. Section 4, for statewide general elections in each precinct with optical scanning voting systems, the county election superintendent is required to provide at least one voting booth for each 250 electors who have not yet voted in the current election. This is a time saver matter for the folks that are setting up the elections. They can take into account who's already voted. It's still a 250 to 1 ratio. It doesn't change that ratio at all. Section 5 clarifies the language that must be included on any absentee ballot application mailed to an elector by a non-governmental entity. Clarifies that there is nothing preventing a person or entity from providing blank absentee ballot applications to electors or from directing electors to an electronic version. Section 6 repeals provisions related to state write-in absentee ballots utilized by military members and citizens residing outside of the United States. This repeal was in effect already with Senate Bill 202. It effectively repealed it, and this just makes it clear that it is. Section 7 requires drop boxes to be locked when advanced voting is not being conducted at that location or when the advanced voting period ends. Completion of the ballot transfer form must serve as an initial chain of custody document for absentee ballots collected from drop boxes. Additional chain of custody requirements are provided. All right, sections 8, 11, and 12 provide chain of custody requirements and handling and storage guidelines for specified election materials. Section 9 provides that employees must be permitted time off to vote on either election day or on advanced voting days. Section 10 clarifies that each political party or political body that has a candidate whose name appears on the ballot is entitled to designate a specified number of poll watchers in specified instances. It requires that certified poll watchers are allowed meaningful observation and access to specified election processes. Section 13 clarifies the information an election superintendent is required to report to the Secretary of State and required to post in a public place following poll closure on the day of an election. Sections 14 and 15 remove the requirement of sealing the copies of consolidated primary and election returns that each election superintendent files with the clerk of the Superior Court. Section 16 requires the clerk or county records manager to retain and preserve specified election materials for 24 months and prevent the materials from being altered, amended, damaged, modified, or mutilated. Section 17 establishes that individuals committing the following actions are guilty of a felony: threatening force or violence on a poll officer or election official, materially interrupting or improperly interfering with the execution of official election duties, or intimidating poll officers or election officials from performing their duties. And sections 18 and 19 provide the Georgia Bureau of Investigation with original jurisdiction and subpoena power to investigate election fraud and election crimes. And that's a brief review of each section, and we'll take any questions.
Chair recognizes Leader Gibbons.
Number 12. Representative Gunner, or Your Honor, I'm not sure which is more appropriate.
Gunner.
All right.
Yes.
We didn't stand when you came up. I apologize. Section 9, and I just flipped back there to look at it.
Yeah.
Each employee in this state shall be given opportunity to go vote. Is that a mandate on every private business in the state, or is that government?
Line number or?
Well, there's not a line number specifically, but he mentioned it. It's in Section 9, which is on page 23.
Thank you.
Starting on lines 575.
Right.
Can you paraphrase that section again?
Yeah, the intent was that the employee be allowed to go vote, and it would be at the discretion of the employer if they can work it out. In other words, if they're doing early voting and there's several days that they can go, they can work that out as to which day they'll go, and I think it has a 2-hour period it's already in the.
So clearly then it is a mandate for any private employer or public employer to allow their employee off to go vote.
Right. If they have an employee that wants to go vote, they have to
All
do
right.
it.
Thank you.
And for clarification, that was a part of current code, is that correct? The time off, what is the extension is the fact that now they can take it during the early voting period or on election day, is that correct?
I think the original was that they had election day only, and this allows for advanced voting, that they can get off and go vote.
Thank you. Other questions? Senator Hatchett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to piggyback off of Senator Gooch's question, when it comes to employers requesting time off, our employees requesting time off to go vote, are we making sure that it is left up to the employer's discretion so that he or she doesn't lose 30 employees for 1 2-hour window? He or she just has to make a 2-hour window available to his employees, and two of you can go now, 2 of you can go tomorrow, like.
Right. If you look at lines 588 and 589, the employer may specify the hours during which employee may absent himself or herself as provided in this code section. So it gives them flexibility so that they can work it out.
Okay. And Mr. Chairman, if I could have one more follow-up question. I saw something earlier about the 201 let's see, section 4, section 4, page 5. It talks about election superintendent shall provide at least one voting booth or enclosure for each 250 electors therein who have not yet cast a ballot in the current election or fraction thereof. I understand the intent is to, I guess, streamline the process to prevent a backlog. My question is, are we concerned with the poll pads or the scanners being the limited reagent there that slows everything down? Have you thought about increasing or requiring a certain number of poll pads or a certain number of scanners to help that issue? Because that's when I go vote, that's where the line usually is.
Okay. That I don't have an answer for that. I know that the number of machines that they have to prepare right now is, I think they have to do them all that they have. This allows them to pare that down so it doesn't take so much time to set everything up. And I would think that those other pieces of equipment would be determined by the number of machines that they had set up.
Okay.
So, but that's my best answer. I'll have to look that up and see if I can get you an answer later.
Okay.
Chairman, if I may, Senator Hatchett, the provision here allows for, under current law, we have to provide for each 250 electors, we have to provide one machine, right? So this is a limiting provision that says that in the event that half of your electors have already voted, this is particularly for a rural area. If half of your electors have already voted and you're only expecting half of them to come, you don't have to put out every machine, prep every machine if you're going to have two people in a precinct like maybe the Millwood precinct where I vote. So it gives them some levity in being capable of putting out less machines if they want to. Now, of course, we're saying they can put out one machine per every 250 electors, but we're giving them the option if the county's superintendent wants to reduce that.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Again, just for clarification, the 250 per elector, if a percentage had already voted either absentee or during the early voting period, then you would still have a machine for every 250 eligible electors. Is that true?
Remaining, yes, sir.
Remaining. Thank you. The leader.
That-
Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That clarified my question. Thank you.
Okay. Other questions? Oh, sorry. Yes, Senator Harrell.
Thank you. Number 5.
5.
So my question has to do with section 16, which is the ability to inspect ballots. You're a judge, is that right?
Used to be.
Used to be, okay.
He's recovering.
So you have a lot more experience with the courts than I do as a social worker. I don't have that much experience with the courts. But is it true that currently, if somebody finds something suspicious and wants to inspect ballots after the election, that you would go through the court system and kind of make your case about why they need to be inspected? Is that how it works?
I've been getting mixed messages on that.
Oh, and here I thought you'd have the answer.
Yeah, well, that hardly ever came up when I was a judge.
Okay.
I've had one suggestion that you can do it by open records request.
Well,
Because
isn't
the
that
clerk-
what this does?
No.
Oh,
No.
okay.
But I also have heard that it should be done by court order, and I think that the latter is probably what is in current law now. It has to be a
Okay, so
court
how
order.
does this change that?
Let's see. Well, what it did was it took off the sealed language, I think.
I think that, Mr. Chairman, you're correct. On line 874, it's struck under seal. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that's it.
And then again on line 898, it's struck under seal. And that would allow, am I correct in assuming that would allow someone who wished to have access to the physical ballot
Right. The
under
clerk
certain
of,
conditions?
the clerk of the court has a duty to maintain the records that are entrusted to the clerk. That would be deed records and marriage records and other stuff that they have.
Okay.
And this current law election ballots, once the election is over with, are turned over and submitted to the clerk.
Okay.
Usually they're kept in the boxes and they remain there for 2 years. Nobody looks at them. Then they bring them to the grand jury, and the grand jury authorizes the destruction of those ballots.
Okay.
And that's pretty much what this is saying as well. They got to hang on to it for 24 months. But they're instructed to make sure that they're not being altered, amended, damaged, modified, or mutilated. That's the addition to it.
Okay. So if they're unsealed, does that mean people can request to come in and inspect them?
I think so, yes, but it probably still has to go through the court and have some direction from the court to the clerk as to how to do that.
Okay.
And that could be cleared up a little more here.
Yeah, I'm left feeling a little confused about it.
Right.
So I'm like wondering about the period of time in between the vote being cast and the certification, and how much access to inspection would be provided at that time, and whether it could delay. If you got a lot of people asking to inspect them, could it clog up the courts? Could it delay the certification? I guess I'm a little worried that there might be a lot of interest in this, even from
Sure.
people out of state, and
in certain counties, there probably would be that.
And so I'm wondering about the effect of that on the courts and on the certification of the vote.
Keep in mind that the clerk's office has inspection of all of their documents, pretty much. If you think about the records that are kept in the clerk's office, the public has access to all of those. So this would be similar to that. They would have to make provisions so that they're not altered, damaged, modified, or anything like that. And that's the same with like the deed records. And I keep using that example, but they also keep case files of criminal cases and civil cases. They have all of that stuff in there as well that people can come in and look at.
But previously these were sealed.
I think, yes. Well, I'll say that I don't know if that was Senate Bill 202 that did that, or if that was the current law beforehand that it was sealed. But it was sealed before.
So that would have prevented a lot of people going in and asking to
It probably would have
see
required that
them.
court order to unseal it.
Right, so that's the difference.
Right.
Okay, so that's a big difference.
Right.
Do you have concerns that the courts could get overwhelmed with requests?
There might be busier days than others. That's something that the clerk's offices deal with all the time, people coming in and requesting documents. They can set the time when people come in to do that, especially with material like this, because they would have to probably set that up to allow them to come in and look at it.
Would they be allowed to copy the documents?
They could ask for it. I'm sure they could. Yeah.
So do you have any concerns that they could copy and alter documents, and we could get
The document wouldn't be handed.
falsified documents out into the public that could then be put on social media and things like that?
Sure. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. They can get copies of it, but they would probably do that through the clerk having somebody there to do it for them.
A point of clarification, and correct me if I'm wrong, the image of the document is already publicly available. Is that
Right.
correct?
That is
So
correct.
there's already an image available to the public for every voted document. And the second question.
And the courts have allowed them to have access to that.
And so they have access to the image. And is it not true that the clerk doesn't become responsible for the documents until after the election is certified?
That's correct.
So that you could not have access through the clerk to a voted ballot until after certification. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think I asked that question in
Yeah, I know,
the
but
I may have told you wrong.
but I'm just saying,
sorry. I
you
didn't
asked
mean
the
to mislead.
question. The question is, I'm not, and maybe we need to defer to legal counsel. What is your opinion on access prior to certification?
right.
Prior to certification, those documents, once the issue of if there's not going to be the seal, those documents would be subject to, 21-272, OCGA 21-272, which provides that primary and election records of each superintendent, registrar, et cetera, shall be open to public inspection and may be inspected and copied at the times necessary by the custodian. So 21-272 has already provided that election records are open to inspection. It was the issue with the seal that had been put in place by state law that was requiring the court order to get certain documents inspected.
Just a follow. Would those ballots be available prior to certification?
Provided that they don't interfere with the tabulation process and the actual steps for the election superintendent to undertake certification and carrying out their duties in the election, yes.
Okay. So that's an area where we may want to consider. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any follow on?
That's good. Thank you.
Let's see. Senator Butler? Oh, I'm sorry. Senator Gooch?
First of all, I want to compliment Senator Harrell. She's worried about voter fraud in Georgia. I think all of us are. But could you tell us quickly how long does it take for the Secretary of State to certify the elections currently? How many days is that? Do you know?
I have no idea.
Because I really don't know either. Does anyone have an answer on that? Yeah, if the elections are held on
My
Tuesday.
understanding, roughly 30 days.
Okay.
Is that fair?
I think that's fair, but I don't know if that's,
Sooner than that?
And follow up, what is the definition of sealed? I see the word seal, S-E-A-L, but I'm not sure if it's defined.
it's not defined other than, I guess, the common practice in the courts. As a judge and DA, I dealt with sealed things all the time. And it can be as simple as just a piece of tape with somebody's signature over it.
It says do not open or?
Yeah, or something like that.
Okay, but it's under someone's jurisdiction and control at all times.
Right.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Senator Robertson?
On line 687, I'm just curious, I don't see it in the document, do you have a definition for meaningful access?
No, sir.
Okay, so that determination is made by a conversation between the individual poll watcher and the election supervisor in the municipality?
And ultimately the courts.
Exactly, because there will be a debate over what meaningful access is.
Yes, sir.
So we'll allow case law to establish what meaningful access would be.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's the way we left it in the bill, yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. My life is based on case law, so it means a lot.
Majority Leader?
It's not me.
It's not, I'm sorry.
Already wet.
Already will.
Thank
Sorry.
you.
Sorry, Mr.
Okay.
The good gentleman from Augusta.
On section 1, looking at lines, I guess 54 and 55, where just trying to get clarification, where it talks about gifts and donations serves the electors of Georgia and does not offer any partisan advantage. How is that partisan advantage determined? Is that strictly someone offering a gift for Democrats, someone offering a gift for Republicans, or is something more to that in determining partisan advantage?
It's left open for interpretation.
So I guess if the gift was going to a certain part of town, it could be interpreted that maybe that's for a partisan advantage.
Actually, it would all run through the state election board. They would decide where in the state that they would distribute those funds.
And then that brings me to my next question, which is how, when we say fair and equitable distribution of such funds, how is that determined, and what does that mean?
That's been left to the state election board. That's not been defined at least in this bill. It's not defined.
Okay, thank you.
Is just to follow on that, Senator, the SB 202 language required the state election board to study and report to the General Assembly a proposed method for accepting donations. So we were asking them to create a process by which gifts and donations could be provided to the state of Georgia and then handled appropriately through the state election board. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And I have at least I have a preliminary proposal from the state election board on that, but I've got to find out the implementation status. So.
And I would defer to the chairman. He's had a lot more experience with that than I have.
Other questions? Other questions? A question on page 24, line 597. This is for poll watchers. And I note that that there's no change here, but just a question on my part, as much to the authors as to the committee. I'm looking at 595 through really 598, but I'm specifically looking at 7 days prior to election or runoff, no more than 2 poll watchers in each precinct to be selected by the appropriate party or the body executive committee. My question is that 2 poll watchers per precinct for the entire cycle? Or is that, my concern is we have a 3-week voting, early voting, and then we have election day voting, and it's not realistic to ask 2 people to cover 3 weeks and a day's worth of poll watching. So I can understand if it's 2 per day or 2 per time period. And again, I think that's just a point of, just something that as a committee we may want to look at it. Is there some clarification there?
I would ask the
Legal counsel.
It is my understanding that in practice, this has been interpreted both ways. So there are certain election superintendents who say it is those 2 people for the entirety, whereas others have been more flexible with 2 observers at a time.
Perhaps that's an area that we might want to consider. Other questions or comments? First of all, Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My understanding on that is if it was supposed to be the same 2 people in each day, that the language in here is 2 individuals selected by, and that would narrow down the scope. But when you say 2 official poll watchers, those are people that are designated by those parties. They're not necessarily the same person every day. They are 2 people that fill that role within. And anybody that went more strict than that was being very creative in the interpretation of the way this language is written. But the intent was that you don't have 40 people standing around 2 desks and inhibiting the ability to vote. So I think it's clear, but if you can say 2 people not named Paul that will work on each day, I think no matter how you word it,
right,
there's going to be ways somebody can squint their eye and tilt their head and get a different interpretation.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Other questions or comments? Oh, sorry. Thank you. Senator Harrell.
Can you push this?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't even realize you could push the button. I thought you had to raise your hand.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay.
Okay, so referring to sections 18 and 19, it's my understanding that currently the Secretary of State's office conducts investigations of situations that could have gone wrong with voting. And in fact, I remember a committee meeting where the Secretary of State testified and explained quite a number of different scenarios that they had investigated. And so I'm just trying to kind of figure out how sections 18 and 19 change that. So say we take a scenario like this lady in the audience pointed out, where maybe an election supervisor sees someone put, a pretty good size wad of absentee ballots into the drop box, and that raises suspicions. Right now, it seems like maybe the Secretary of State's office would investigate that. Would that change it to like an arrest being made immediately and it going into courts instead of the Secretary of State's office? Or just kind of help me figure out how this changes those scenarios.
Okay. I don't think anybody that works for the Secretary of State's office would have arrest power. And also, this allows the GBI to have original jurisdiction. Right now, they have to be invited in to investigate any type of wrongdoing that's done.
So how would that start? I mean, if it's GBI instead of the Secretary of State, how would that play out?
If this bill passes in this form, or that section, I should say, in that form, it would allow the GBI to, if they get tipped off that something's going on, they can step right in and investigate. They don't have to be invited in to do it.
So you could have scenarios where somebody thinks something might be going on, and it could just be somebody who has a large family and is therefore putting a bunch of ballots into the drop box, and all of a sudden the cops show up, and so that's what we're doing?
Yes.
Wow.
I mean,
okay.
that happens a lot, even just in regular criminal cases. You get tips on things, and the cops check it out, and it's not what
Well,
they
with
say.
the number of tips we got last election, as the Secretary of State presented all these possible scenarios that through investigation were kind of explained as not things that were, that concerning, or maybe it was misunderstandings or somebody who didn't know the law. So these scenarios would turn into cops showing up and arrest, like it could happen a lot?
It's important that the investigation be made, whether it turns out anything or not.
Would that mean an arrest?
If somebody's done something wrong, and they
Or
can,
if somebody's suspected of doing something wrong?
they have to have probable cause to believe that they committed a crime in order for them to make an arrest.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Senator Robertson.
Mr. Chairman, and you know, the hair on the back of my neck always stands up when I hear "and the cops show up." So in the reality of it, if GBI has original jurisdiction, if somebody in Muskogee County were to witness somebody taking an inordinate amount of ballots to a drop box and they felt something was suspicious, is it not true that they would most likely call 911 or call whatever, and then whatever agency responded would then in turn contact the GBI, which would have original jurisdiction, make them aware of the situation. The GBI would then come in and conduct an investigation. This would not be SWAT teams parachuting out of the skies onto the courthouse grounds, but they would conduct an investigation, and if during that investigation violations of Georgia law were determined to have happened, probable cause, as you said, discovered, then in that case, they would go before a judge to seek an arrest warrant or whatever, and due process would go through in the normal, smooth way in which it's conducted each and every day during investigations by the GBI. Would that be a little closer to the
I agree
mark?
with everything you said.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it.
Senator Harrell. I'm sorry. Senator Jones.
Yeah, no.
No. I thought it was your button. You do look a lot alike. Y'all could be twins. It could be twins. It's a hair.
So on that issue, on what type of offenses would be investigated? Is just the ones dealing with basically the ones intimidating offenses? That's the ones that would be investigated, or any type of election offenses?
Any type of election violation, yes, that would be a crime.
Mr. Chairman, let me chime in real quick.
This was originally his part of the bill.
Currently, like the chairman said, the GBI is capable of investigating. They just have to be requested. In 2020, the GBI assisted the Secretary of State with State Farm Arena video, signature audit, double voter cases, residency investigations, issues in several counties, and allegations of voter intimidation. Now they would be able to do that without the Secretary of State or any local DA or other investigative body requesting them to do so. So to the chairman's point, if you break the law, there will be due process, but you could be arrested, yes.
Can I have one more?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
And so currently, when you go in front of the state election board, they then kind of make the recommendation at the end of the hearing, and sometimes they will refer it over for prosecution or maybe to the Attorney General's office. Will that now not be in place? It can just go straight to law enforcement, is what we're saying?
Law enforcement conducts the investigation. The district attorneys would conduct the prosecution.
Is there anything that's been going on that would warrant this to where we don't still go to the state election board and they say, okay, we will refer this for investigation, because they have the hearing, they listen to the witnesses, and then they say we're going to refer this to criminal or investigation? What's happened to where you think that process is inadequate?
I think Senator Harrell alluded to it, the significant increase in the complaints. You have very few officers capable of investigating it from the Secretary of State's perspective. If you have the entire GBI's resources to be able to adequately and efficiently investigate these things, then it should be a means of efficiency. So if you are being investigated for these things and they're not founded, then you'd be found, the investigation ceases. Likewise, if you are found to be guilty, then due process continues quickly. So the volume itself, I think, lends itself to getting a large and capable law enforcement agency to do the investigation.
And if I may, the short timelines that we have in elections to, verify things, get everything settled, you need a law enforcement arm to be able to step in and do those kind of investigations, especially because some of these things probably cross jurisdictional lines, and you need an agency that has statewide jurisdiction. That would be the GBI.
Can I ask one more, friend? Mr. Chair?
Let me come back to you, Senator, if that's okay. Chair recognizes the minority leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm struggling trying to figure out what kind of crimes we're talking about. It doesn't sound like we are going to vote. It sounds like we are doing some other kind of crimes. When you say that a person can't take my ballot, my daughter's ballot, my daughter took my ballot with her ballot and dropped it in the box. Now, and she's in law enforcement, there could be a law enforcement person there that thinks she's committing a crime when she's only dropping a couple of ballots in the box. And I'm just struggling trying to figure out, are we voting, or are we at some other place committing some crimes? What other kind of crime do you anticipate to make us think that we need the GBI to be on board with this bill? What do you anticipate? What else can happen besides dropping the ballot in the box?
We have double voter cases. Do you have
some proof of that happening somewhere?
There were many investigations referred to the GBI already.
Okay, now we can go back to why that might have happened. It could have happened to me. If I didn't know better, I got a whole bunch of applications in the mail. I've already gotten one a few days ago to register. Now, if I was just an ordinary citizen, not this person with all this political knowledge, I might fill that application out thinking that I needed to re-register. I could get more than one ballot.
I don't think that would occur in that when you send that in, I think they check those records.
Yeah, they do check the records. I'm just trying to figure out what other kind of issues.
Or residency investigations.
Happens.
So if there is someone alludes to the fact that you may not be a resident of Georgia, but you're still voting in Georgia, that's another means for the GBI to investigate. But I would like to point out that in this bill, we do fix the application that you receive. We're trying to clarify that. That's one of the biggest complaints I got was I've gotten 15 applications after I've already voted. Well, a lot of times those are third parties, and we're trying to clarify that language in this bill to say that this is not an application. This is not a state application from the Secretary of State. So we are trying to work on that issue as well. But like I mentioned to Senator Harrell, if you have issues that are within counties that you need a law enforcement agency to immediately work on, then it doesn't have to take a stop, so to speak, at another agency. The law enforcement agency can do the investigation and either say there's nothing here or move it on for prosecution.
And this doesn't mean that the GBI would investigate every allegation. Your local sheriff's office can do it as well. But where it's needed that they go across jurisdictional lines and they need statewide statewide jurisdiction, the GBI can do that.
And so the GBI will be posted at the precinct?
I doubt that. They don't think they have that kind of manpower.
Well, how would they know? Somebody's going to file a complaint and say that we saw a person putting 2 or 3 ballots in a box. Or how's that going to happen? Where does the complaint come from?
They'll get tips about things, but I'm sure that they will exercise their discretion in where they go and what they go after.
I'm just concerned that with these kind of tactics that it borders on intimidation of voters.
I don't see that part of it. They're not going to be standing right there at the polls staring at everybody that walks in and trying to figure out if they got a warrant out for them or something. They're not going to be doing that.
I don't know.
Senator Butler,
People go far.
I'd like to explore that a little further because the GBI can investigate right now. Are people intimidated to vote right now?
They could be. I don't know.
Well, there's nothing. The only thing's changing that they don't have to be requested. They can investigate right now if requested by the DA, the sheriff's office, or the Secretary of State. So
what for?
Anything. Any provision of the election code that is found to be a plausible tip, right? I think that the chairman said it best. They're going to have to use their discretion to make a determination to move forward. Certainly, if you're bringing 2 ballots to the ballot box, I don't think that that's going to be the case where they're going to say, well, 2 ballots. Senator Butler's daughter brought her ballot.
Oh, they won't know me. They won't know me.
Well, I'm using you because you used that example. But if someone brings 2 ballots, I don't think that it is reasonable for anybody to say, we need to investigate this person that brought 2 ballots. I don't think that's even happening right now. But if you bring 150 ballots, then there may be some concern. Of course, you could be a very large family.
I can't see a person bring 150 ballots to the box, though.
Well, certainly, you may not think that, but regardless of which way you lean politically, if we get plausible. If we have someone that calls and says that's happening, we have to investigate it. Do you not agree?
Well, yeah, you would have to. If
and that's all that we're doing here. That's all that we're doing. If there's somebody says you're bringing 150 ballots up there, the GBI can look at it if they deem they need to, and if they find that they have 150 cousins that they're allowed to carry these for, then I think that we're perfectly fine. I certainly understand the hesitation here, but we're not changing anything except for the stop at another Secretary of State or another law enforcement agency.
Yeah, I appreciate the discussion. Let's move on and recognize Senator Robertson.
Doesn't having the GBI come in, doesn't that add a certain level of credibility also, that not only do they come in and they determine that there may be wrongdoing, but they also determine that there was no wrongdoing? And as far as the double voting in my district, in my county actually that I live in, individuals were getting the multiple applications. They would send in and get an absentee ballot. They would fill out the absentee ballot. They would not mail it in. Then the day they would go to the polls, they would go into the polls, vote in person, and then on their way out, they would drop the absentee ballot into the drop box. Now, once the first ballot was counted, and when the second ballot was ran through from the drop box, it would thereby cancel. The second ballot would not be counted. But their intent was not to defraud the system. Their intent was they did not trust that their first vote was going to be counted, so they just wanted a backup vote just to make sure. And I think the numbers that first came out in my county were double-digit numbers, well above 30, where individuals were passing around, hey, here's what you do to make sure you're just make sure you're. That's my walking in music. I thought that. So I think one thing we have to understand is the GBI. They're just not there looking for bad guys, but they also offer credibility to an election to show that everything was done correctly. And I think, wouldn't you say it was true that it would expedite things? Because right now, if the Secretary of State does an investigation, finds improprieties, they send it to the District Attorney's Office. Then the responsibility of the investigation falls to the District Attorney's Office and the investigators within that office, who must go out and basically start the investigation over and do it from a law enforcement standpoint. We're bringing the GBI in on the front end. It's a law enforcement investigation from Jump Street. So they are making sure that all rights and other issues that come along with due process are being adhered to and followed, and during conversations that Miranda, if necessary, is being provided, and those other protections under due process. So when it gets to the point the citizen has been thoroughly investigated, the rights have been completely protected, and the GBI can either say nothing happened with this is completely unfounded, or then they can go to the DA's office, submit the information they have, and the DA can immediately seek indictment or whatever based on the law enforcement investigation. I mean, it's just kind of cleans the process, would you not say?
Again, I agree with everything you said.
Okay, you got to disagree with me at some point or something's wrong.
Thank you. The chair recognizes the rule chair.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here today. You know, I believe that in our society, the election process should be the most secure thing that we have, so there's no doubt that the election is confident and it is true. Now, I actually was a poll watcher here in Atlanta, the runoff for the 2 U.S. Senate races. I was a poll watcher at the precinct by the old Braves Stadium, the University, Georgia State University, and everything there was conducted perfectly from what I saw. However, I always thought the tabulation place would be where you really need to have eyes on it. However, when you're not sure if prosecution will happen, if there is some election violations that are pretty well documented, I think you have to have somebody you can count on to investigate, and I think the GBI is the perfect place to be. So I appreciate you bringing this forward. And again, I hope that this makes sure that elections have no discussion of being improper or fraudulent, and I hope we never have that in this state again. So thank you for bringing that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair recognizes the majority. I'm sorry. The chair recognizes Senator.
So I'm now the majority leader? I'm now the majority leader.
I thought you were the majority. You got another promote. Hold the GBI investigate that. I can't count my votes.
So there's been a lot of talk about ballot harvesting, which I don't believe is actually illegal everywhere. It is illegal here. When we had the last election and we were in the middle of a pandemic, there were a lot more people voting by absentee ballot, including a lot of friends of mine and me too. Immediately there was discussion amongst my neighbors who simply wanted to be helpful, that they could go around the neighborhood and collect the ballots. No, wait. To collect the ballots just to be nice and deliver the ballots to the ballot box. They weren't aware of the law. They were trying to be good neighbors. To which we immediately said, no, don't do that. You can't do that. But I'm saying that to say that it's not intuitive that ballot harvesting is a crime. Not everybody knows that. And I remember one particular case that the Secretary of State described to us at this committee meeting, where evidently even a candidate had collected some ballots together, I think someplace in South Georgia, and delivered them. And the candidate didn't even know that they weren't supposed to do that. So I think the result of that was that the intent wasn't to commit a crime, and they talked to the candidate, and the candidate was like, oh, sorry, I'll never do it again. And it stopped there, right. Because the initial intervention was with the Secretary of State's office. If the initial work is with the GBI, does that just, when you consult a surgeon, you're probably going to get surgery. If you consult the GBI, you're probably going to get a crime. And so I really am concerned about the GBI being overwhelmed. I think the GBI is still hiring to fill the duties that they have now. Isn't this an awfully big thing to take on, and can the GBI handle it with their current staffing?
I think they can. They have regional offices all over the state with agents assigned to those offices. They're dealing with all kinds of crimes across the state right now. So this, for one night, this is...
So do you think if in the scenario where somebody is ballot harvesting but has no clue that it's even a crime, that is going to result in prosecution?
No. Just about every crime requires a form of intent.
Okay.
And if they didn't intend to do that and the officer does the investigation, finds out that that was true.
Would there have to be an arrest and jail time?
No.
Before
No.
the investigation?
No, not before the investigation. Not unless they catch them doing something right in front of them. Otherwise, they will do their investigation. They'll ask the right people and then come back with a conclusion one way or the other. That's how it would work.
Okay. I fear intimidation also.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Jones.
How many referrals were made to the Attorney General from 2020 election from the Secretary of State's office?
That's a good question. I don't know.
Well, actually, you would, because you can go to the Secretary of State. I mean, they have all of the election board hearings
Just haven't
on
asked
that.
that question of them to find out.
But if we're going to use another law enforcement arm, we kind of want to know how many referrals have been made to know if this is even necessary. Because I think all of us are kind of like getting into this conversation about ballot harvesting and double voting. If you go to the Secretary of State Election Board and actually look at the hearings, very few of those things involve any of that. So that's why I want to go to how much discretion is the GBI going to have as far as what kind of complaints they pick and choose that they're going to investigate.
They have all the discretion in the world to decide what they're going to investigate. So, I mean, you got local law enforcement that can do the same thing, okay? And most likely that's who will get called and they'll do it. The GBI is a backup for multi-jurisdictional fraud and for the timelines that we have in elections. They can operate a lot faster. So that's the reason that this provision's in this bill.
But wouldn't that be accurate? They could operate a lot faster if they're not getting a lot of... In other words, what I'm saying is, if you were to say things that might be a felony the GBI would investigate, that would narrow down possibly what they would investigate. Because what they may find is they're going to get tips. The things that we think they're going to get tips about someone, and this is actually a real case, went to State Election Board, someone who rode to a handicap spot with a Ronald Reagan sticker on and actually was turned into the State Election Board. That's the kind of tips that they'll get. Or someone who at an elderly folks' home did a raffle and said, if you can show me your vote sticker, you can get into this raffle to get a television. But it had nothing to do with voting. It was just trying to encourage people to go vote. The person who was doing the raffle didn't even live in the district. They weren't trying to influence any elections at all. Right. Those are the kind of calls that they're actually going to get. Are they going to go run around investigating that kind of stuff?
Again, I think they would exercise their discretion and refer it down to the local law enforcement level or ignore it. Okay.
Thank you.
This is something that y'all will be deciding on this bill.
I have the distinct pleasure of recognizing the majority leader for a question.
This is me this time, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I will agree with the Minority Whip on something. You can go to the State Election Board website and look at all the cases. I've done it. I have done it. Okay, you can shake your head all day long. I have done it. There are hundreds of these cases on at varying degrees of severity on that. So what I love about this is when we're talking about these in here, we go to the levels of absurd on the extreme on these cases. No, the GBI is not going to go investigate a Ronald Reagan sticker on a handicap spot in the middle of some precinct. They are going to go investigate when that guy has brought in 20 absentee ballots Monday, 20 absentee ballots Tuesday, 20 absentee ballots Thursday, and somebody goes, the same gentleman has come in with multiple ballots and to put them in the drop box over multiple days. That would be something that would go, we probably need to investigate this. When you have, there are a 100 examples over the last time that probably would have been appropriate for the GBI to step in on the front side. Not millions, not thousands, but hundreds. And some of those were co-located, so they would probably have been under the same investigation. So you're not overtasking a force that's, you're worried about them, again, going back, and we can do this all day long, Mr. Whip. We go back and looking for that bumper sticker in the parking lot at a precinct. And so, I mean, we can do this, Mr. Chairman, till midnight.
Midnight, yeah.
But unless we get to the reality of the scope of what they would be probably investigating, we're just here talking.
I hear the concerns as far as time. Realize today's objective was to put the bill on the floor for discussion, to go through it and make sure we understood what was in it, and to begin the vetting process. This is the beginning of the vetting process, and we'll take two more questions. I'll recognize first Senator Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The point about the bumper stickers was exactly that it is de minimis, which means also the local law enforcement, which you can go to now, would also treat it as de minimis. So therefore, the local law enforcement would actually get the larger cases. There's no reason to have the GBI. The GBI is not going to investigate the bumper sticker any more than the sheriff's department is going to investigate the bumper sticker. So that leaves the local sheriff's department, the local DA's office with the quote-unquote larger cases. So there's really no reason to bring in the GBI. That's the point that I was trying to make.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Senator Robertson for the final question.
And to the majority leader's point, he's the one sitting next to Senator Harrell. I want to point out, not only did I go to the Secretary of State's site and find these, I printed them off and used them as reading material. And the things that was disturbing about them was some of them were very serious cases, and it took 24 to 36 months to adjudicate these cases because the Secretary of State's office is not equipped nor trained to conduct an investigation. And to the fact that local law enforcement investigating these cases, I think we clearly understand the resources and the time involved, because in the county that I served in Muskogee County, on election day and other thing, our deputies were assigned to protect precincts and to assist in moving ballots and maintain the chain of custody of ballots and machines and other things as they move around the county. So our officers are not available, and we're a department of approximately 400 employees, are not available to run around and do police work, if you will, over every little complaint. And so having an opportunity to have an agency as professional as the GBI to come in and properly investigate these cases solely related to election seems to be the most efficient and professional way to conduct it. And again, the most important aspect is we restore the confidence of the security of these elections and the citizens who pay for these elections and have a right to have fair, free, and open elections.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Robertson. Again, I want to thank Representative Burchett and Representative Gunder for bringing HB 1464 to the committee. We will continue this discussion Monday, 4 p.m., and we will be happy to accept public input. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.